Hello and welcome back to Entirely English. We are continuing with our naval themed idioms today, and we are at the letter O, so more than halfway through the alphabet. As mentioned before, these are idioms which are still commonly used today, but which originated in the Royal Navy from back in like the 15th, 14th century to date. So our first one is an old tar. The sailors who worked on a ship were called jack tars. You probably remember that. So an old tar was a man who'd worked on the ship for a long time. They were also called an old hand, hand being the title given to a crew member, like we had before, all hands on deck in the very first idiom video. Therefore, an old hand or an old tar was sailors with a lot of experience who'd been at the job for many years. And we use that phrase very often today. We'd say, something wrong with your car? Ask John, he's an old hand at fixing engines. Or, welcome to the company. If you need anything, talk to Angela, she's an old tar. Actually, you probably avoid that because it sounds too much like old tart, and that's a bit rude. Talk to Dave, he's an old tar. Angela would be an old hand. You've got to avoid those little mistakes. So that's our first one, an old hand or an old tar. Our next one is over a barrel. This is an interesting one because there's two arguments about its origin. Some say that in London, when somebody was caught for a petty crime such as shoplifting, they would be tied to a barrel, the big wooden containers for water and wine and beer, that sort of thing, tied to that and whipped. It doesn't seem logical really to me, because in many of those town squares back in the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, the Elizabethan period, they had things in the middle of town like stocks where somebody could be tied and bound. They wouldn't need to use a barrel. But in the Navy it is said that we've talked about people being flogged before, that they'd be tied. Some people say they're tied to the mast. I argue that's a bit of a difficult situation because they would get in the way of the ropes. They could harm the sails. Sometimes they had those grids which covered the hold, and they would be put up and they'd be tied to that. But also there is the argument that they were tied over the barrel of a cannon and whipped. So their arms are wrapped around the cannon, the wrists are tied, their ankles are tied probably to like the wheel or axle for the wheels, and then they are whipped. They can't pull away, the cannon is really, really heavy. So they are helpless, and that's the meaning we use today. To be helpless, you have no other option. So you say, the boss has told me that I've got to finish these reports by Monday. He's got me over a barrel. If I don't do it, I'm going to be fired. You're in an awful situation. Helpless. Our next is on the rocks. And I'm not talking about whiskey. On the rocks. We talked before about the Devil May Care, where a captain was going through dangerously shallow waters. So the devil being that long piece of timber at the bottom of the boat, it could get damaged going across those rocks. And if you did that, your ship could be what they call beached on the rocks. You've got the rocks, the ship comes and it's stuck. It can't move. You are on the rocks. It's a dangerous situation. The ship could topple sideways. It could be holed in the bottoms. The water gets in. When something is on the rocks these days, it means it's in a precarious or dangerous situation, on the verge of failing. You might often hear it referred to as a marriage situation. Our marriage is on the rocks. We're maybe in the process of talking to divorce lawyers. On the rocks. Or in business, you might say the business is on the rocks. It doesn't mean that it has failed. but it is on the verge of failing. Our business is on the rocks. We need to find a new investor, somebody who will save the company. And the last one I'm going to do for today is Overboard. Some of you might remember there was a film in the late 80s, early 90s with Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn. She fell off a ship and lost her memory. And that's what is Overboard. It's that falling off a ship. Man overboard! The sailors are doing something. One falls from the rigging into the sea. Other sailors would shout, "Man overboard!" And they haul in the sails and circle the boat, try to find him. We have a different meaning in the use of it now. When we say something is overboard, it's too much. I asked my husband for a car so I could go to the shops and not have to wait for him to get home. And he bought me a Ferrari. He went completely overboard. It's too much. It's excessive to go overboard. We're going to finish with another one, actually. This one has two understandings from it. And the phrase is out of my depth. Now, most people associate this with swimming, going in the swimming pool or in the sea. When you're out of your depth, you are in water that is too deep for you to stand up in without the water going over your head, out of your depth. Problematic situation. The child is drowning. He went out of his depth. He went into the deep end of the pool. But in the Navy, the depth was also the clearance of the ship from the waterline to the bottom of the boat was the depth of the boat. And if you're out of your depth is how much water you can sit in. Understand? If you are out of your depth, you've gone into water that is too shallow and you're probably going to end up on the rocks. So in the days of those old sailing ships, the tall ships, they would have ropes with knots on them, and they were used for measuring the speed, how quickly the knots were pulled through your hand. We're doing 10 knots. They'd also be used to measure. You put a weight on the end like the anchor and drop it into the sea and lower it. And when there was too much slack on the rope, it meant the weight had hit the bottom, you could see the depth of the sea. So it might be 3 yards, 20 fathoms, something like that. And you'd often do that when you're going through unknown water, sail very slowly and measure the depth all the time. If it started getting shallower, then you were approaching an area that would be out of your depth, not deep enough for your ship. The modern usage of out of your depth means you're in a situation that is too much for you. You're not qualified maybe to do it, or you don't understand. It's too complicated for you. So when I started making these videos, I felt completely out of my depth with all the cameras and everything. I'm still not very good at it. I apologize. Out of your depth in a situation where you are floundering, you don't know what to do exactly, you need help. Right, so apart from old tar or old hand, none of these are exactly positive ones. I'm sorry. Hopefully in P we will get some positive idioms. In the meantime, I hope you found that useful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you again soon. Do leave a comment. Bye bye now.